Back to Unapologetically Original. Today we are meeting somebody who truly embodies the title of this interview series. We're meeting Paige Hernandez, who is a multidisciplinary artist extraordinaire and also the Associate Artistic Director at Everyman Theater in Baltimore, Maryland. Paige will be with us shortly. In fact, she's here. I'm going to add her to this live video right now.
Hello, hi.
It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this, and I'm
Yes, of
super
course.
excited.
Yeah, and we coordinated, and we didn't even get the memo.
I know.
That's
awesome. A little bit of pink going on.
Yeah, I love it.
Which goes with your lipstick. But Paige, I'm super excited. I have so many questions for you. Firstly, I want to ask you, this is the first thing that comes to mind. You are such a wonderfully skilled performer, director, choreographer, playwright, educator. And, you know, I'm so inspired by you because there was a point where I found myself in a similar place where I realized that, you know, I'm more than an actor. And it took a while for me to embrace that truly. Because often in this field, we're encouraged to really follow one thing. What was it like for you to embrace that and the fact that you're a multidisciplinary artist? And how do you balance your time and energy?
Great question. I'd like to say that I didn't plan any of this. My multidisciplinary hats really is the culmination and manifestation of a lot of rejection, a lot of no's, a lot of identity crisis, a lot of my tenacity, being a type A personality. So kind of the intersection of all those things meant I would take on different jobs and different projects and different skills, mostly because I had to, out of needing the resource. I'm also hip hop 365, you know, 100, 1000%. And something that is very characteristic of hip hop is that resourcefulness that makes something out of nothing, lemonade out of lemons. And yeah, so I I always started out just wanting to be a performer, got my degree in performing and in journalism. And then something would come down the line and I didn't have a director. And I'd say, well, I'm going to try. Or I didn't have a lighting designer. Well, I'm going to learn how to do that. And not at all dismissing the incredible amount of effort and talent it takes for each of those individual skills, but essentially enough to know and appreciate even more what collaboration means when I'm with someone who actually knows the job. But I take it on enough to understand it essentially so that I can at least speak the language. And that's what it's been. It's been a juggle of all those different things, and I've gotten better at some, and then some people seek me out for certain ones. When you are a multi-hyphenate, you kind of become a unicorn, which I never really embraced the unicorn either. But I understand that being a woman of color who has a certain skill set isn't something you find fast or readily or has availability. So those are things that I just leaned into. And that's kind of how the multidisciplinary artist was born.
I love that. Maria Fernandez says, inspired, same. And Jayla Choi Music says, beautiful women of color. Thank you. Thank you for that. I've heard so many wonderful things about the Queens Girl Trilogy that you directed at Everyman Theater. And I have a little story to go with it. So I was working on my own solo show at the time, and my mentor and director, Teresa Davis, called me up. I was in New Hampshire, and she said, we've got to get you to Baltimore. And so we were looking at, because she'd just seen these plays, and she said that, okay, let's figure out how do we get you to Baltimore to see this. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it happen because of logistics, but clearly, you know, the plays made such a great impact on her. So I want to talk to you about what was your experience like directing these 3 plays, and what were your main takeaways from it?
Yeah, sure. I am beyond honored, thrilled, and privileged to have the experience that I had with the Queens Girl Trilogy. Which again was that kind of perfect manifestation of timing and opportunity to work with such wonderful artists. So the backstory is the Queens Girl Trilogy is written by Colleen Sinnette Jennings, who is a beloved playwright based here in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, who taught at American University for decades. And this is her true life story. And her story is epic, and her story is inspirational and empowering. She's also got one of these unique stories where she just happened to be the neighbor of Malcolm X, and her father was in the Audubon Ballroom when Malcolm X was assassinated. And then that upheaval led their entire family to uproot and move to Nigeria during the Civil Rights Movement as an escape from what was happening here in the States. And then from there, from Nigeria, she goes to college in Vermont at Bennington College here back in the States. So we have initially in that first show, A Fish Out of Water, coming of age story. And in the second show, what it means to really put all your chips on the table and make that bold move to escape oppression. And then what it means to come back and understand that identity and how it informs you and whether or not you decide to conform. So that's the 3 shows in a nutshell. And again, all written by Colleen, and then starring 3 fabulous actresses. Dawn Ursula took on the first role, Erica Rose the second, and Felicia Curry the third. And the first 2 started out at different theaters in DC, which I was a part of those processes as well. And then Everyman decided to put them in rep, which meant for the first time ever, unprecedented, you could see all 3 shows. Wow. Well, initially it was 2 shows, which I think were the ones you were trying to see. Yeah. And then the 3rd show opened right as pandemic was starting. So it came down 10 days after performance. But the silver lining in that is that we were able to present all 3 shows streaming just this past fall, or up until like January or February. So it's been tremendous, you know, and these actresses won Best Actress for Helen Hayes, and it's been this roller coaster where everyone's really been able to benefit from it. And I can't stress enough how unprecedented and meaningful that trilogy is. I just don't know of another trilogy that speaks to women of color, that stars women of color. Our design teams for each of those processes were all women. Directed by a woman of color. I mean, just the intentionality around the authenticity of those pieces, I can't quite put my finger on where else that's happened. And for that alone, it feels historical, it feels monumental, and I'm just so thrilled to be a part of it. And to lend my expertise to the solo show, and to really put the solo show, as you know, at the forefront. Because the solo show is so hard. And the solo show really points at different things that I don't think a general audience sees initially. The amount of work and stamina and endurance and juggling and insecurities that you have to strip away. So many things. It really is kind of the actor's marathon as well as their ultimate platform. And because I had the opportunity to do my own solo show, which was directed by Danielle Drakes, who I believe is in the room. Hi, Danielle.
Oh, great. Hi.
Yeah. I learned so much from her and from my process with my own solo show. So to be able to pass it on, it's truly a testament to Danielle, because I had such mastery of what that felt like and what felt comfortable. And that's because of the way she taught it to me, so that I was able to then transfer it on. And I feel like it's the best gift to give. I feel like I got the most delicious cookie recipe. And then I continue to go and make cookies and nourish and feed those who want to experience it. So it's pretty cool.
Oh, I love that. Ms. Drake's journey. Is that Danielle?
Yes.
Hi, hello. Thank you for joining us. Could you talk a little bit about your relationship with Everyman Theatre? You've been part of their resident acting company since 2017, I believe, and then you became Associate Artistic Director last year in June. So what has this journey been like so far?
Yeah, my journey with Everyman runs really deep. It's probably my longest connection to a theater, which actually dates back to its opening in the 90s. So Everyman was created and founded in 1990 by the current artistic director, Vinnie Lanchisi. And I, at the time, or rather 94 through 98, was a high school student at the Baltimore School for the Arts. And so there was a partnership where we were able to go see Everyman shows through the high school matinee program. So for me, Everyman was a lot of my first introduction to theater, to seeing certain plays, to seeing certain artists who I aspired to be. Both Everyman Theater and Center Stage, based in Baltimore, we were able to check out. So that was huge. I have very fond memories. My first trips to the theater are the same theater I work at, which is nuts, and it's full circle. And which is also why it means so much to me to stay so involved in the education process and portion of our organization, because I knew what it did for me. So that was the 90s. We're talking 30 years ago.
Wow.
And then 2005 or 4, they gave me my first equity role. So while I had been pounding the pavements and auditioning, probably at that time for a few years, I hadn't gotten like the official equity contract that actors aspire to get. And then Everyman was like, "Oh, we trust you, you got it." And I was like, ah! And that was a show called The Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman, which was, again, them putting their trust in me and their faith and also believing in me and my capabilities. So that was in my 20s. And then in my 30s, they offered me the resident company member, which was, again, fantastic. It just feels like I keep leveling up in terms of learning more about the institution, the organization, what it means to be a part of a resident company who really is like family. I grew up alongside almost everybody in that resident company, either by seeing them as a teenager or when I started working there in 2004. I think I did 3 shows before I was a company member, being in shows with them, you know, workshops, residencies, you name it. And then, you know, Vinny approached me about this associate artistic director position a couple years ago, actually. Mm-hmm. And I was in the thick of touring my own work, which I just wasn't about to slow down and, you know, wanted to keep kind of pursuing that. And then COVID-19 happens, mm-hmm. where touring comes to a complete halt. Mm-hmm. And Vinny was like,
"Now we do this."
And I was like, "Ooh, this timing. Let me tell you about this timing." So it worked out, and it's actually something I'm extremely grateful for because it's kept me afloat. As I've dealt with so much loss this year, like so many people, it's been the one stable, consistent thing. So here I am, and since my start in July, we've made such great traction and progress with re-examining who we are as an organization, what we'd like to contribute, how we'd like to be perceived, as well as doing our best to catch up on industry standards, innovate industry standards. This has everything to do with anti-racist and anti-oppression work, accessibility work, also what it means to be a theater in a time where everything is virtual and digital. These are things that, you know, no one saw coming. And then everything kind of got thrown onto the wall, a big splat in, you know, March or so. And it's been figuring that out, which way to just best build back up from something that's just kind of been shaken to its core. And while it's been tough, it's something that I have been, I don't even know how to say it, something that's kind of followed me my whole life. I join organizations or different residencies and companies in moments of transition like this. It's always been the case. And I think it's not necessarily bad luck. It's that I like these kind of challenges. I like when I can be in a place where they are exploring how to stretch and how to grow, because that's also what I'm interested in. As well as how to be better, how to improve. And so these things excite me. And when I think about my administrative time at Arena Stage and at Roundhouse, where I've also spent some time administratively, they were all in times of transitions. When I did Roundhouse and when I did Arena, they were both moving into their new buildings, or, you know, programs were being shifted and changed and created. And so here I am at Everyman, where same thing. It's like a global pandemic happens and it completely rocks our industry. But the thing that excites me is being a part of that change and being able to say, this is where we started, we survived, and this is where we're going.
Mm-hmm. And, you're also known for we spoke a little bit about it, your own wonderful original solo shows. I was really excited to read about both Paige and Full and Havana Hop. What was it like bringing both of these plays to life? And what is your process with developing your own solo work?
Yeah. If Danielle is still here, I give her all the credit all the time. So Danielle was one of those friends and colleagues who had an opportunity with her own company, theater company, the Hajira, and wanted to do a solo show. I, again, never in my life planned to do a solo show. And she said, hey, I think I've got the funding to make this happen. And your story is incredible, just what I know of it. Would you be interested in writing something like this? To which I replied, hell to the nah. And she just was persistent. And I have to thank her because it changed my life. My entire trajectory of my career changed from the moment I said yes. And I could identify that moment. It's not gray for me at all. It is when Danielle kept pushing and prodding and poking me to do this. This was also during an exciting time where hip hop theater as a genre was really solidifying and making a stance and a presence like it hadn't before. This is pre-Hamilton. This is all of that. This is just everybody kind of from the spoken word scenes that I was a part of, from the B-girl scenes that I was a part of as a dancer. We're kind of merging into theater. And all of a sudden you see someone like a Mos Def and a Top Dog Underdog. And then you start to see more solo shows from, from everyone from Issa Davis to Will Power. Their shows start getting produced by regional theaters and Danny Hawk. And then I was like, okay, well, let me do something here because, women were underrepresented. And I don't think anyone was really doing what I was planning to do, which was a visual mixtape is what I call it, which for me represents monologues and dances and theater, as well as all of the elements of hip hop. So that aesthetic is really present. And so, yeah, that was in 2009, I believe we started to develop that. And that was truly autobiographical. So what was also really awesome about that process is Danielle had an entire team in place. So I was able to have the great fortune to develop a solo show with a dramaturg and with a set designer, which I know doesn't necessarily happen. So that support was there. I just had to deliver. And then, it's wild when I think about it because, hella insecure, had no idea what it would be. And I remember the first weekend of performances, it was like this cosmic shift. I was one of the first artists at that time who was asking for folk to interact through technology. So come watch the show and tweet the whole show. And I was encouraging that. And in 2009, like before there was live tweeting, before there was so that after the show, I was literally getting tweets that were like, can you be in Rhode Island next month? Can you be in Massachusetts after this? Like, here's the show. I was engaged. I was getting tour offers literally in the lobby. And I didn't know until that moment that there was such a void and that there was such a need for a story like this and that it had more universality than I saw. I was so caught up in the kind of like closeness of it, the trees of it, that I hadn't seen the forest. And almost immediately it took off and started touring, as soon as it came down in DC.
That's amazing.
And, things started moving so fast that I couldn't keep up, to the point where an agent stepped in and I was booking and planning and budgeting and doing that full-time job of kind of curating and being road manager in that way and still traveling with Danielle and my brother who was in the show. And it got to be its own full-time job. So I needed an agent. And then the agent says to me, hi, for this next gig, you need an EIN number. And I was like, what the hell is an EIN number? You mean my social security? And he's like, no, you need a business number. And again, I was like, what the hell is that? And he's like, you need to go into business by midnight because I have to get that contract in by the morning. And I was like, what? Like, are you serious? And he said, look at these zeros, because this is the money they were offering. And I was like, he's like, you're going to have to pay it forward. Get on LegalZoom.com, get an LLC, do it. I had 4 hours, Priyanka, to figure out a business.
I didn't know that was. Is this how B-Fly Entertainment came
yes!
to be? Oh, wow.
This is what I'm telling you. It was all like a bunch of me going, what? And going to YouTube University and Google University. And in that moment being like, with my dog and with my husband saying, what are we going to name it? Is this a big enough decision that I can do this in 4 hours? But I didn't have a choice. So I think it was like $400 into an LLC, went into business by midnight so that I had that number by 9 a.m. And, you know, B-Fly Entertainment was born.
And all the zeros.
Yeah, and it paid for itself. That $400 was reimbursed in that, you know, and B-Fly for me is the intersection of B-Girls and Fly Girls, which are my ultimate women superheroes. B-Girls are break dancers, women in hip hop, and Fly Girls, based on the Fly Girls from In Living Color, who are just, it's super monumental and kind of my creation, but also because they were women who were super talented, not hypersexualized, of the hip hop aesthetic, multicultural, multi-generational, fly all day, every day, B-Fly. And I made it entertainment because I knew that I wanted different types of productions, not just theater. My husband's a jazz musician. I wanted to be able to have an umbrella that could fit kind of all of the arts. So one solo show started it all. And now I have 10 original shows. And as you mentioned, Paige in Full and Havana Hop are my 2 solo shows. And then the other shows range from up to 22 people. And then again, B-Fly looks at multicultural and multi-generational hip hop theater experiences. So one piece that I'm super proud of is the Nayaka project, which looks at, with my collaborator, Chitta Kalyanderg, who is a classical Indian Kuchipudi dancer. And we were able to take the Ashtanayakas from very classical text and flip them into hip hop, where I translate them, do the poetry, she dances them. I took on some Kuchipudi, she took on some hip hop. But that really, for me, and it really points to what I do. I'm looking at those cultures, I'm looking at those intersections. I want my audience to be mixed in culture and ages. And then, there's shows that explore my Cuban heritage. There's shows that look at the entire diaspora, honestly, but through the vehicle of hip hop. But solo shows have a sweet spot for that, because I just know what they're capable of.
Yeah. Danielle's asking, the book is next. So what is this book we're talking about?
I know, we're going to speak it into existence in this moment, Danielle. Woo, Lord. Woo, child. Danielle has always said I should put all of the plays into an anthology. Because only a couple are published. So the idea would be to publish them all and put them in the world. And then that's baller status, when you could just sit back and just go to the mailbox every day and get your check from the work you've done. For now, it's been a decade. Yeah.
Since Danielle is here, I want to talk a little bit about how the director-performer relationship is in a solo performance context, especially, because typically in plays, it's the director's vision. But in solo shows, you're also, more often than not, the playwright and the performer. So you have a certain vision going into it for what you want the piece to be. So how do you sort of marry the 2 visions into one? And if any artistic conflict arises, how have you, solved that?
Yeah, that's great. I'll definitely speak to my experience with Danielle, which was as a performer, and then my experience as a director to the other ladies who I've had a chance to direct in solo pieces, as well as Danielle and I flipped the script. I was able to direct her in a solo show just a couple seasons ago.
Cool.
Yeah, Twilight 1992 at Rep Stage. Which was so funny because I was just using everything she taught me. But it was a really nice kind of full circle moment. But I think it goes back to a lot our training, the different schools we went to, and that's really leaning on the text ultimately. And then thinking about how we want that text to best be supported. And that can look like different types of transitions or the body work or the breath work that you do. And I think it's really about getting on the same page about that first, that you're both wanting to tell the same story and agreeing to be in the same page with that same vision. And then, you know, bringing the playwright in. For my case, I was the playwright, which I'm sure Danielle can tell you the challenges that brought. Because when you're the playwright and the performer, you know, there's a lot of editing involved. There's a lot. I had to grow up fast in terms of not taking things personally. When, you know, Danielle was like, we need to cut it. It's too much talking. It's too much. And I'm like, but that moment in my life. And she's like, really? So there's a lot of, you know, compromise that needs to happen. There's also a lot of pushing and stretching. One of the most memorable parts of Paige in Full is a part I never wanted to write or perform, but it's actually what makes the piece the strongest. And that's someone like Danielle as director who identified that. So it's trust. I think if you're able to find as a solo performer a director you know or have had a previous relationship with, that feels like a solid start than a stranger. Just someone who kind of knows your nuances and sensibilities, your integrity even. Those things really came into play time and time again, because that solo show became therapy. It became a gripe session. It became re-triggering, traumatic. It became, my family is going to come see this show and won't know half of the stories I'm telling. Yeah, right? You probably know. Yes.
Way too well.
Right. So, you know, the person you're going to collaborate or work with in that moment really has to hold you up through all of that. And again, I realize it's not always available, but if you can wait for that perfect timing, for that perfect person like that, I think it's great. And then in terms of being a director, I just want to create a safe space. I want to create the most safest space that feels like you can go above and beyond your own creative expectations, because there is such a safe space for you to be vulnerable and brave and honest. And that for me is more important than when we dig into the work. I want to first make sure that you feel as comfortable as possible to be the only or the main tool that tells the story. And then it's also interesting, all this anti-racist work that we're doing now and anti-oppression work and safe, you know, practices, because these are things that I was naturally implementing just in being an educator and being a solo show performer. To know that we navigate these spaces sometimes, most of the times alone, but the process and how we set that up sees us through. So there are things 10 years ago in my process with Paige in Full that I leaned on right now in my last tour date when something crazy happened, and I could go back to the breath, or I could go back to my worth, or I could go back to how important this story or universal it is. So yeah, I think that's been the only difference in the approach, you know, and they both kind of eventually show up. It's just which ones you start with first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for answering that. I want to talk a little more about the Naika project. So how did this beautiful collaboration come to be, and how was this piece received by the audience?
Such good questions, because those are the things that terrified us. So Chitra and I worked together at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C. in the education department for many years together, and had always been fans of each other. For me, you know, watching her dance blew my mind. You know, this was a lifelong journey for her, like a lot of classical Indian dancers. And to see the kind of blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, it was beyond impressive. I don't have the words for the type of dancer that Chitra is and how I'm in awe watching her. And likewise, I hope to say for her, to me, she was able to check out my hip hop shows, a lot of the performances I was doing around the area at that time. And so we always knew we wanted to collaborate. And something came about for the Intersections Festival, which was a festival through the Atlas in DC again, where, yeah, we had an opportunity and funding Funding, man, I mean, always does it. That's usually the last push you need to put pen to paper. Yeah. And I have to say that was one of the hardest processes, and not because of Chitra and I's collaboration, but because of the subject matter. Because we were dealing with classical Indian text, a very traditional, it was almost like, I wouldn't say the Bible per se, but it was of a place that felt like we shouldn't necessarily encroach. But it was very important to us to bring this to, or specifically the Ashtanayikas, into a place that was relatable, fresh, contemporary, that youth could really get on board with, that they didn't see such a big divide generationally, which was huge to the B-Fly mission. And that's kept being the battery that powered us. It was like, we know we're on uncharted territory and there's about to be a lot of shade and heat potentially. Pero we're going to try this because it was important for us to have the youth see it and know that they could make these classical connections when they were going through any moment of adversity. And for us, the Ashtanayikas, it follows the stages of grief and loss and love with these women. And we decided to add one more Nayaka, which is the empowered Nayaka, who is someone who has been informed and shaped by the other ones. It's also a story that really pumps up feminism, honestly, that really says a lot of these stories and myths and fables were created by men and were things that we have continued to honor and live through. But what happens if we flip the script and really make the story our own? And then it became an issue of like translations. Hip hop doesn't always have the most positive connotation culturally across the globe, even though it's the most loved and widespread. So would the Indian community be okay if I crumped all over this Padam and Javali? Do you know what I'm saying? And those were questions where we were like, woo, we won't know until we have an audience. And that was terrifying because, we looked out into the audience and we were able to capture a huge Indian population and a huge African-American population, and to see them sitting together and to know that one has no idea what Ashtanayikas are and one has lived their lives by those. And they were, converging to watch this show brought in by myself and Chitra. And the other thing was the music. And I got to give props to the Swaminathan sisters who composed the original music for this, who again, just completely blew my mind and opened my sensibilities around the knowledge of Indian classical music and what that is and what that means in terms of, again, a lifelong practice full of intentionality. And so then I want to put hip hop beats on that. And then I want to do spoken word to that. So we had to have a lot of difficult conversations just about how do we take something that was made and again, break it to build it back up. But I was the only one bringing my own kind of inner city, Baltimore, where I'm from, hip hop perspective. And I had to learn a lot and learn it fast. And I can't believe we pulled it off. And I can't believe we pulled it off well. And that it was so beloved that it was in demand. The festival asked us to come back immediately that night. We've also toured this piece. We've toured it to Detroit. And then before pandemic, we were supposed to be in Seattle for a run, specifically going to different Indian populations throughout the country. And you know what's interesting is I've always had this connection to Indian culture and knew that my heritage included Indian heritage. My grandmother in Cuba was in an Indian orphanage. And fast forward, I end up doing a residency that's through Wolf Trap and uses Havana Hop in India, in Gujarati.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I get there and I'm like, this is home. This is not an adjustment for me. Everything from taking a scooter to school to the food, to the people, to learning Gujarati, all the basics I needed to know, all came natural to me. Long story short, took an ancestry test. I'm from Gujarati.
No way.
Gujarat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
That is
and
crazy.
So it's all swimming in there. There's all these things about ourselves and facets of ourselves that we don't necessarily know until we're challenged on a project, an artistic project for me, like Nayaka, where I was like, why is this here? And why does it feel like it has to come out? And I have to shout it, and I have to keep working on it, and I have to jump these hurdles. And it's because it was something that was a part of my DNA all along and is meaningful in a way that I just never saw coming.
That's amazing.
That was a really long roundout explanation.
I love it.
But like, yeah, it's one of those like, wow moments, as my students do. Because I'm just like, I never would have thought. And then, yeah, to then come back home and do that show again and understand how it's informed differently, having spent time in India. What?
I love it. I love it so much.
It was great. And I can't wait to do it again. It's just like,
please do it again and take it to tour in India. I'm sure people would love to see it there. How do you choose the people you work and collaborate with? Are there any long-term partnerships with people or theaters that you'd like to talk about?
I guess just like-minded folk. And I've been really fortunate over the years to start with collaborators who, again, I have a history or relationship with, or that I'm a big fan of their work. And I know that with our 2 minds in the room, or however many minds in the room, we can spark that really brand new, innovative idea. Very rarely do I collaborate from scratch or in a forced kind of contrived an organization makes me. Very rarely. And I think over the years, I've just gotten to know a lot of amazing and talented folk, and specifically in the DMV area. Mm-hmm. And we as a community here is just so dope because everybody wants to see you win, and you want nothing more than to see them win. The generosity here is like unlike anything. And I've done the New York thing and the Chicago thing, LA, Florida. It's nothing like this area where folk are just literally rooting for you. So they've always looked like DMV artists too. And then as I've started to tour, I've taken in more national collaborators who've really helped to, take my piece to the next level. One blind date I did kind of have, blind collaborator date, is with Anastasia Victory, who arranged the music for my hip opera, Stomping Grounds. And she's based out of Broadway in New York. And I was paired with her through Glimmer Glass Festival, who commissioned the opera. And again, I was like, I don't know this person, I don't know if it's going to work, but I know the project she had done definitely spoke to just, again, like-minded people, her tenacity, the frequency in which she kind of moves, her energy, her vibes, the vibes.
Yeah. And
yeah, I was blown away. So that's one of the kind of blind date things. I do like to be artist-centric, I have to say. Very rarely do I go after an organization anymore. Maybe initially, maybe, in the beginning of things. But I'd much rather keep that agency, keep that worth in the artist circle, and then have the organization clamor and drool after what we create without parameters. Yeah.
I love that. The real Uncle Jeff says it's a hell of a community here in the DMV. Welcome back. I think he was also here for Raymond Caldwell or Samayani 24's interview. So thank you for tuning in again. So a significant portion of your work, Paige, is involved working on productions with or projects with young adults and children. So how does your approach change when you're working with different age groups?
Something that's been important for me, which, as I mentioned to you, is keeping those parallel paths of education and arts going. Only because, it didn't save my life. It gave me a life. And I think there's a huge distinction in that. While my path in Baltimore was full of very Baltimore-centric cray and trauma, I had different paths and directions I could take. I had resourcefulness. But the theater really gave me more than I sought after. And so for me, I can't do one without the other, honestly. So even when I am now associate artistic director at a theater and doing my own company, I'm still teaching. I'm still in residency. I have a thirst for learning, but I also have a thirst for staying as humble and modest as possible with my craft. And that means the ability to articulate my craft to anyone at any age. So I work a lot with early childhood, 3 to 5-year-olds. I want to be able to explain to them Nayaka Project on their terms, in their, you know what I mean, with their expertise and prior knowledge as much as I can a college student. And it's different skill sets, for sure. But that to me means that I have a true understanding and comprehension of what it is I'm trying to convey. And if I can't do it to any of those given youth or population, then I need to clarify and I need to go back to its purest nugget and understand what it is I'm trying to say. Because I still want that 3-year-old to experience my show like I want that 13-year-old, like I want that 30-year-old, like I want that 70-year-old. They should all be in Nayaka's audience. 3 years old, all the way up to the, you know, as old as who can come out. And education is what keeps me, kind of sharpens those knives. So I can't do one without the other. And if I do one without the other, I lose scope of, again, modesty, humility, ego, all of those things that creep in, self-worth. And not even that creep in for myself, but that organizations try to slash you down with. Being an educator reminds me and grounds me of where I came from, what I'm able to share, all of those things. And I you know, the more nourishing part is education for me, but the fulfilling and the reward is in the performing. But, you know, I was middle school rock star famous for most of my career, and I love it. I love it so much. Like for shows to come, for students to come to see Havana Hop. And, you know, we were packing out 2,000 seat theaters. Florida is where I do Havana Hop the most because of its Cuban population and its Latinx population. And we would do the show like in the beginning of the week, matinees, 2 shows a day. I'm seeing tens and thousands of students. And then I go to their school later that week to do dance classes, to do theater classes. And I'm walking down the hallway and it's like Michael Jackson walking down the hallway. And that makes me so happy. Oh, it's the best thing ever. And it's not celebrity status where I'm like, you know, Rihanna or somebody up here. I would love that Rihanna money, but I don't want all the cray that is celebrity. Do you know what I mean? And I want to be able to just walk into Wegmans and get my juice and come out. And being middle school rock star famous really just helps me like live out a dream where I can feel the energy and the impact immediately. And then that fuels me to then go into a job and do an administrative job. Because I'm not going to get that same energy from adults or an organization, but I get it from my students. And I know that it means the world to them that I represent them, that I lift their voices, that they're heard, that they can come to the table, and I will then take whatever it is they give me and then take it into administration, take it into my other jobs. And then more recently, pretty much starting with the Sandy Hook tragedy, I started taking on theater as a practitioner for trauma. And that has also opened my eyes into so many different things that, again, speak to my humanity in a way that performing and, you know, creating does not. And it's my little way to be able to continue to shift and try to make positive strides in this cray, this upside down world we live in. And so while I hate getting the call to come to Florida, to Parkland, to come to Las Vegas for the shootings, you know, it means so much to me that I am in community with people who are going through trauma, and being able to not necessarily heal through the arts, but giving them a vehicle to express themselves, to be distracted, to move, to understand social and emotional development. It's therapy, and it's all linked into my background as performer and as educator. So again, I can be doing what I'm doing now for as long as possible, but it has to be simultaneous with education.
Reality and truth says such a profound reality, Paige. You are so right. Absolutely.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Jeff. Oh, this is so great to see everybody in the virtual place to be.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us.
Yay!
If those who are watching, if you want to leave any questions for Paige, please feel free to do so. I'll be happy to include them. You were going to direct at Short North Stage in Columbus, and I saw that among the list of things that didn't happen because of COVID-19, and I lived there for a couple of years.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I did live in fact, when I just moved to the US, which was, I guess, a little over 5 years ago now, Columbus was my first home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is indeed a small world. But is this going to happen once we're going to start attending live theater again? The directing gig at Short North Stage?
You know, that's one of the few I haven't heard back from in terms of where they've landed. Yeah. A lot of the gigs that were dropped or canceled, I'm happy to say, have rescheduled or decided to move on. But it's still just so many uncertainties. I can't even say yes to all the things that were dropped, even if they're being rescheduled, because everybody's rescheduling them at the same time.
Yeah.
So everybody wants to reopen pretty much January 2022. And so everybody's putting all their shows right there. And I'm like, well, what about the rest of life? But, you know, again, I know that's from a very privileged and grateful place. But so, yeah, but I haven't. But I hope that, you know, if this project doesn't work, that there's still something there. And yeah, there's Raina who lives in Columbus. That's right. So I hope to be there soon. And then I'm going to need, you know, all the food recommendations for Columbus from both of you.
Oh, there are so many good places. Yes, we'll definitely talk about that. How do you pick and choose your projects, since we just spoke about, you know, pick and choose your projects as an actor, playwright, director? When do you decide to say no to stuff? You know, because that's important too.
Yeah. It's a tricky question because it's changing in pandemic.
Yeah.
And I don't know, did you get the news, or did you see, it's kind of gone viral now, the woman who plays in Moulin Rouge? Did you see her? I think this was here as of yesterday, or somebody out there listening knows who I'm talking about, if you could put it in the comments. But essentially, she's not coming back to Moulin Rouge, even though Broadway's having it back up, because of integrity. And this has a lot to do with the Scott Rudin controversy and just what Broadway has done in a time like this to really show actionable change. And so I'm finding that now is kind of a litmus test. You know, I decided long ago never to walk in anyone's shadow. No, that's a Whitney reference. But I decided long ago not to do traumatic plays anymore, Black traumatic plays specifically. And I remember being very alone in that, because everybody was like, what? You could be directing everything everywhere. To which I was like, yeah, but the mental toll that takes on you, and the physical toll, and the marital toll, I mean, it affects everything when you are in a theater 8 hours a day talking about somebody being murdered. So I stopped that a while ago. Those were big no's for me. I would read a script, and if it gave me any kind of like willy-nills, And don't get me wrong, there are plays who have found that perfect balance where they can speak about some hardship and then find a way to flip it or uplift it or change it or have you be more informed about it. I feel like Twilight 1992 was a lot like that. So that was my first initial nose. And then I knew what my wheelhouse was. You know, my wheelhouse looks like plays that are steeped in either solo performance or movement or hip hop aesthetic. And so if those plays didn't come with that, I'd be like, and I'm understanding now how much they translate across the entire kind of American theater canon. But initially I was like, I know what I'm an expert in. I can do rhythmic language. I can do poetry. I can do rap. I also do a lot of director choreographer combinations. I can do those. So if there were approaches about plays that weren't like that, I could say no easily. Mm-hmm. And then challenges that excite me. 2 seasons ago, I directed Proof at Everyman Theater. A very traditional play in that, you know, you're not going to find necessarily choreography or poetry or hip hop aesthetic. And that terrified me, but I loved the play. And I loved the play from as a student. And I was like, wow, what would that look like with my lens? And that was an exciting challenge. So I said yes, even though it was the unexpected checkbox, you know. Mm-hmm. And you came to see that show, and my signature was all over it. So, you know, I put some movement in it. And I put, like, you know, poetic visual aesthetic. Wow. So that, yeah, people who knew me were like, oh, yeah, Paige directed that. And then it got the most incredible praise from the playwright himself and from the Wall Street Journal. Mm-hmm. And that was the one I had huge doubts from. But I went in and I did me on top of Proof. And it worked out, right? Yeah. So it's a combination, I guess, of how I say no, because it's got to be based in the theater should be not should, but should always be my sanctuary. And I don't want to go to a place that's going to make me more stressed, especially after pandemic. Like, I'm not with it. If there is any tension or friction with the collaborators or with the piece itself, I'm not with it. I ain't got time for that. No more drama or stress in the job that I love, because that's abusive. That's like telling that boyfriend he can keep on doing that thing, but you're in a relationship. So I'm trying to find better ways to really have more agency in just saying no and saying why, so that this type of programming can start to fall by the wayside. And, you know, this is such a pivotal moment this summer for us, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, what's still going on, what's still happening, being unapologetically Asian as well, because I have Chinese heritage, and just really making sure that now more than ever, historically marginalized voices are first for me. Like, yeah, straight up. So those are the kind of projects that I take on. Either they're challenges or they feed me, and they're going to have positive spirits a part of them, safe spaces. The intentionality is just always on point. That's how I say yes.
Have you ever faced, because, you know, you were pretty successful in everything that you were doing, did you ever face a time when someone tried to capitalize on that? And what was, if that did happen, what was it like recognizing it and stepping away?
Woo!
Loaded question.
Yeah. And hell to the yes. I feel like you have to be burned sometimes to know that the pot is hot, that the stove is on. Woo! So what's been interesting about this time again is the honesty that's coming forth. And these are things that I feel like artists of color have literally been sitting on their entire careers. The microaggressions that have become macro, that are just straight aggressions that we just eat and we suppress and we sit on them like we can sit on our hands because we just want to advance in our careers. And I have dozens of those. I'm sure you do too, where we silence them and choose to silence them to continue to play a game and to continue to navigate spaces that don't look like us in the majority. And, you know, I see these articles coming out. I'm a big Coming to America fan. And Eddie Murphy came out right before the sequel and was like, yeah, the reason why Louis Anderson, Louis Anderson, the comedian, he's the one, like, you know, who works at McDowell's and he's like washing the lettuce and making the fries, white comedian. It's like the reason he was in the movie is because the producers insisted that I have a white male comedian present. And it's like, wow. And then went on to say any white presence in that show was pretty much deemed by the producers. So when Eddie Murphy had his script, they weren't necessarily a part of it, or they weren't planned to be cast. That blew my mind, because these are the type of silences we sit on. And I knew that I had several commissions where I would, you know, submit that final draft to that organization, and they were like, where are white people in the show? We need access points for the white people. We need access points for our subscribers who are mostly white. And I'm like, damn, I can't just tell already a multicultural story and you can't just find those access points like I've been doing my entire life. When I go to see an all-white Tennessee Williams play or an all-white Bertolt Brecht play or Shakespearean, I can still find the access points in the universality of the story, but it's never been that standard for people of color. So as a writer, I was always trumped up against, where are white people in the story? And that's tough, because as a writer, I was taught to write what you're an expert in. And I'm not an expert in different cultures, or at least making them sound as authentic and well-rounded and dimensional as possible. So how can you ask me to write that? And that's the same standard I hold white writers to. I can tell 2 minutes in, 5 lines in on any play written by a white person that has Black dialogue. I can tell. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure any culture can tell when a white person's written our culture. Mm-hmm. But you want me to do that? Like, it's just a look in the window. We talk about equality and equity, and it's simply like, but would you expect that from me, but would you do that for me? Would you write in more Black characters for me? And the answer is always no. But they want to satisfy a patronage that is more important in that moment than my cultural authenticity. Okay.
That's and so,
you know what I'm saying? And then I feel like that's when imposter syndrome sets in. That's when it feels like, you know, I could be a sham. Because, yeah, there could be some white person in the audience who is like, wow, we don't really talk like Gene Willikers. And not that I'd write that, but like they could tell, just like I could tell, that wasn't written by and for them. That was some bandage on a burning wall. Literally, the wall is in flames. And a producer's like, can you put this Band-Aid on it and put some white people in this way? So that's the big one. And there's been several commissions where, again, they're thinking of their audiences, which makes total sense. But then I'm like, are we really then speaking to the truth? That is, we want to be inclusive. We want to hear these marginalized stories. We want to hear them in their purest and most authentic state. Because if you really feel that way, then I wouldn't be getting a request like that. I would be able to bring myself in my fullness, in my 100%ness, what I'm an expert in, and let that be enough. And let that be, you know, essentially what's going to be the success. But there's a lot of doubt around what success looks like for those who haven't quite embraced us in our fullness. And that's something that Hollywood is still grappling with. I mean, we're seeing everybody grapple with the doubt. The dollars are behind it. But, you know, if I had $1 every time somebody asked me for a glossary for one of my shows, or can you put in the program the definitions of some of the slang you're using, where I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, is this real right now? Where, again, I don't go to see a show, a Paula Vogel show, and don't understand a word and expect for the theater to provide that resource for me. Not when we all have Google in our pockets. But anywho, so that's been the biggest compromise. And like you said, when to walk away, when to know you're not willing to fight that day, or willing to let that fight kind of simmer down so you can win the bigger battle or the bigger war. Because sometimes there's a lot of tiny battles to win the war. And sometimes I decide to give them up. Sometimes I decide to fight them. Sometimes I decide to educate them just so that I can ultimately have a show that a 3-year-old and a 30-year-old can come to.
Mm-hmm. Shayla says, tell the truth, shame the devil, passes collection plate.
Ooh, Lord. And I'm being diplomatic, but if this was later at night, Priyanka, with some drinks, it'd be a little different.
We'll have that version again sometime.
Awesome.
How do you think artists and artists of color can have more agency in this business and gain more control over where their careers are going?
We're in an opportune time for that right now, just because everyone is doing a lot more listening. Whether they're actually hearing you is another story, but they're willing to listen. So I think this is a great time for artists to be super clear about where their yeses lie and their nos lie and what their limits and boundaries are, so that if any time they're challenged, they can clearly articulate in that moment a way to advocate for themselves. And advocacy for me has never looked like confrontation. And it's been a hard skill to really do better at, because it used to. Oh my God, when I was in my 20s, Baltimore Paige, she would have, took a different direction. But now I'm really learning what it's like to be able to give a challenge that is steeped in intelligence, in worth, in boundaries, in understanding, in empathy. I have much more traction with that. And again, that's the difference between advocating and complaining. And that's where agency ultimately lies for me. It's challenging. My heart is racing. I'm flooding. My blood is boiling. But I already know what to say. And I already know what those parameters and limitations are. And, what's going to be the deal breaker? If they tell me they can't adhere to one of those boundaries, is that a deal breaker? Or is it 3 of those boundaries? And, sometimes you won't know until you're in the moment. And so, yeah, I just really encourage all the artists out there to examine those things before, the match is lit. So before you're in confrontation, to really say, okay, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to not be heard if I have suggestions in the rehearsal room about what I want my character to do. I'll give 3 chances for the director to hear that. And if they don't, then I'm speaking. You know what I mean? It starts there, and that's training wheels. And training wheels never go away. They go off for a while, but then sometimes I got to put them back on. And even coming back to work after pandemic, I've had to exercise those muscles again. So I'm here to say that, it's a constant learning thing, but usually it does leaps and bounds for folk who speak up for themselves. That's how I became multidisciplinary, because someone probably broke a boundary or said no, and then I went and found a way to make it happen for myself. So they're blessings in disguise. And honestly, if you come up against that much tension with a collaborator, with an organization, with an artist, it's usually not worth your time. Like, straight up. You're not meant to be there. It should flow, and the energy there should be all in a place where it's meant to be. And if it feels too forced or too struggled at any time, it's probably a sign, an instinct to either keep your head low, keep it moving, get your September mortgage, or dip. So just depending on what your needs, make sure your needs are met.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. Do you ever see, and you spoke, maybe hinted hinted about it a little, but do you ever seek out plays on your own, especially new works, and work directly? And you said you did work directly with artists before you even find a theater or space. So how does that work?
And is that to direct in new plays or to be a part of, or?
Both, mostly direct, because like working with an artist without really having an organization involved, and then finding the organization.
Yeah. I haven't done much of that with B-Fly, just because it's been so centered around my own work and trying to really make more of a permanent legacy with it, because right now it's still a bit intangible for others to perform or produce it. But I haven't really, I read a lot, I see a lot, and I read a lot, but it's mostly with an organizational hat on in terms of who we can bring in to produce and work with. And there's a lot of exciting new work and writers and shows and plays that I'd love to get my hands on. No, I haven't done it where it's just, a direct kind of connection and to make it happen. And that's the difficult kind of straddle of needing an organization and its resources for a moment like that to be able to make it happen instantly versus a much slower burn if I did it directly with my own funding. But what it does do for me is it completely opens my awareness to who's hot, who is got incredible promise, who's someone to keep my eye on, who's someone who, maybe not in that moment, but 3 years down the line, I'd love to cast in one of my shows. That's been the really great thing about pandemic, actually, is I'm seeing talent now from all over the country that I wouldn't have necessarily seen. And there are people I would love to work with simply based on their virtual work from this past year, who would have never been on my radar before, but I am like waiting for that prime opportunity.
That's great. You're so prolific as a performer and artist. So how do you strike the right balance between doing enough, doing too much? Because I often find myself struggling between, I don't know if I'm doing enough, and then I, take on too many projects and I'm like, this is too much. How do you find that sweet spot?
It's a constant struggle. I'm not great at it. I gotta admit. I think there are times where I'm better at it. Unfortunately, there have been more times of complete burnout and breakdown, which I think my last big burnout breakdown was big enough that I'm a bit more proactive about it. But it took that to kind of get me here. But I wish I was a lot better at it. And I know my husband wishes I was a lot better at it. Because, and another thing is with this business that we're in, I don't plan for double duty a lot, but it always happens to me. And that's because dates shift, especially now as theaters are opening back up, where I've made commitments to 2 different shows that were supposed to be back to back, but now all of a sudden they've collided. And now that means 12-hour days for me. So, some things are out of your control. But like you said, like we talked about earlier, that new kind of checklist and litmus test that includes other things like the topics at hand, the people in the room, the integrity behind it, the intentionality. I'm hoping those things help me to kind of filter through and make stronger choices and less choices and more lucrative choices.
Yeah, time just flew, and I didn't even realize it's been more than an hour. Okay, so final question to wrap this up. Really, I did not realize it's been more than an hour. Final question to wrap this interview up. What are some of the projects that are coming up that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I'm currently in person at Everyman Theater directing Pipeline by Dominique Morisseau, which is one of those plays, talk about the checklist where it just checks all the boxes. What a magnificent and beautiful piece to work on that's dear to my heart because of its link to public school education, to the pipeline of prison, that isn't based in trauma, that enlightens you, that shows you perspective, shows you nuance in an entire spectrum of any given situation. Working on that in Baltimore, and it is the first theater piece back in a year, where a set was built. I've got a full design team, a cast of 6 amazing actors. And this is to be filmed. So we're prepping for tech next week. We've been in rehearsals we've got to run through today. And this will be filmed and available to anyone worldwide, starting in a couple of months. But if you want more details, you can check out the Everyman Theater website. And then I have a digital children's series I'm really proud of called Paige and Friends, which is through the National Theater of Washington, D.C. So if you've got young ones and you've got YouTube, you've got a free series there. So there's several episodes where I'm talking to different friends, and you get to have dance parties and sing-alongs and sign language and all that good stuff. So that's pretty great.
I love that.
Yeah, and then just gearing up for as we get closer and closer to a more uniform kind of theater opening. There's just a lot going on, and I'm, again, very grateful and proud to be in the mix like I am. So yeah, I hope folk can continue to check me out.
Yay. DJ1, I hope I said that right, says Paige forever. Absolutely. Yay. Paige forever. And on that note, thank you so much, Paige, for joining me on this live interview. And
this was awesome. Thank you for letting me talk so much. Oh my goodness, are you kidding?
I loved it.
I got to do another one. You and I, just like a one-on-one Zoom date.
Yes, I would love that. Yeah, we can talk a little more. I'm in Philly. I'm not even that far from DC, so I can now come and check out all of your shows.
Yeah, and I should get up to you too. That would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Paige, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you, and thanks everyone.
Take care. Bye, everyone.